What's at the root of being controlling? It's fear. It's fear of what am I gonna do if this outcome happens or that outcome doesn't happen. And we're afraid of that. I even explained to you that it's a fear of our own emotions. It's a fear of vulnerability. When you say you're afraid of the unknown, what you're actually saying is you're afraid to be vulnerable. You're afraid of putting down your guard. You're afraid of something scratching you. You're afraid of something getting close enough to you that it hurts you. That is the root. That's what's behind controlling behavior. What's behind controlling behavior, if you take off all the layers and all the armor of controlling behavior, it is a person who's afraid. It is a person who has anxiety and fear of what may come. And the fear that if I put my guard down, if I don't control this situation, if I don't control every aspect of this situation, I might get hurt. I might get disappointed. In other words, I might have to be vulnerable. In other words, I might have to feel something. And I'm going to take this back to that root because we're afraid to feel. Many of us are afraid to feel. We're afraid to feel our emotions. We want to be protected from having to feel things. And so there's all these different ways, and if you look at psychology, there's all these different ways to avoid emotion, to avoid having to feel. It's really very basic. You can ask a licensed therapist. It's really very basic. What we're doing is we don't know how to interact with our own emotions. We don't know how to process our own emotions. We don't know how to digest, how to face our own emotions. And actually that becomes the root cause of dysfunction. It becomes the root cause of illness. It becomes the root cause of problems, whether it's inside of you, outside of you, or between you and others. It becomes the root cause. So when you go back and you look at something like the need to feel control, because I know a lot of us struggle with that. I know a lot of our parents struggled with that, especially when you are in survival mode. Now let's go back to that, because many of us grew up with parents who were in survival mode. Do you know why that is? Well, because many of our parents were immigrants, or many of our parents might have even been refugees, and they came from trauma. They came from parents who came from trauma. They came from parents who came from poverty. They came from parents who came from war. They came from parents who came from, who were refugees themselves. They came from trauma, and their parents came from trauma, and their parents came from trauma. You understand? And so many of us grew up with parents who were in survival mode. Now, when you're in survival mode, as we talked about, you are simply not using your prefrontal cortex. The part of the human being that makes us higher creatures than animals is simply the prefrontal cortex. There are parts of our brain that are animalistic, right? Animals can also have fear. Animals also have a fear response. Animals also can feel hunger. Animals also can feel thirst. Animals have that. But what animals don't have is a prefrontal cortex. And so what happens is, simply put, when we are in survival mode, we are not using our prefrontal cortex. It's essentially offline. And so we are in our, what's called the limbic system, which is just survive this, right? And so many of us, you have to learn survival skills. You guys ever seen like these YouTube videos about how to survive in the wilderness, right? Weirdos, some of them, man. Like there's this one guy that my kids watch, and he was like having snakes bite him, and weird, like, why are you doing this? Like on video. so he can show how to like survive. Okay, that's a little wild. But the point is that we learn survival skills psychologically as well. And one of those is you better be in control. Because the moment you lose control, you will not be safe. You gotta stay holding on to that steering wheel. And it's like we're holding onto it and our hands are bleeding of how tight we're holding onto it. And things will happen to try to make us let go, and we are not gonna let go. And the harder you hold on, the more it hurts you, the more you break your hand, the more you crash, the more you hurt the people around you. But ultimately, it is a survival mechanism to try to avoid the emotion that you are afraid of and the outcome that you're afraid of. And so when we say something like La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, we are actually letting go of the steering wheel. Not so that it can crash. No. We are giving it to Allah. That car never crashes. That car never crashes if you give it to Allah. That's what La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah does. And that's why it's a cure for 99 ailments. The least of them is stress. Because you're saying that, no, I'm not in control. Nothing happens, nothing changes, nothing transforms. There is no power, there's no strength except by Allah. It is not by me. It is not by my so-called control of the situation. It's not by my so-called control of my children. It is not by my power. It is not by my money. It is not by my status. It is only by Allah that anything happens. Do you guys understand what I'm saying? And that is such an important realization. It will cure you of so much anxiety. So much anxiety. Because at the end of the day, you realize that whatever outcome there is, if Allah carries you through it, you will be okay. You will be okay. That is where tawakkul fits into this. Because trust in Allah is what gives you the ability to say, even if it doesn't work out the way I've envisioned, because we all have a plan, right? Are you guys one of those that like 2-year plan, 3-year plan, 5-year plan? Yeah, are we 5-year planners over here? I remember one time someone asked me that. I just looked at them like they were crazy. Because I think it's wild. I mean, for me, I'm like, what? 5-year plan? She said it works. That's great. That's great. Make a plan. But realize that it's not your plan that is the best plan, right? So we can make plans, but recognize we are making plans blindfolded. Do we recognize that? That's the point. Is like we're blindfolded making the plan. Fine, make it. You know, God be with you. But realize that you are blindfolded. And so the problem is that we become very attached to our plan. No. It has to go my plan. And I'm not even just talking about macro. I'm not just talking about 5 years. I'm talking about the plan for today. You know what I mean? The plan for today has to go like this. And if it does not go like this, things are not going to be okay. This attachment to it has to go the way I say it has to go, because otherwise the world will end. Do you understand what I'm talking about? And so the attachment to our vision and the attachment to our plan is actually rooted in anxiety. It's in fear. It's in, as you said, sister, fear of the unknown. No, if it doesn't work this way, I'm terrified of what might come. And maybe I can't handle it. Maybe I'll be unsafe. Maybe I'm going to have to feel grief or disappointment or fear. You know, and it's interesting because anxiety and fear are not the same thing. Do you know this? We think of them as the same thing. But in a sense, anxiety is actually what happens when you refuse to feel your fear. You don't want to feel afraid. You don't want, see, there are normal human emotions. Have you seen Inside Out? So you have an idea. There are normal human emotions. All of them were created by Allah, and therefore they're not a mistake. They're not an oversight. They're not like a mistake in the design. Sadness, anger, fear, joy, disgust, etc., right? But when we look at the emotion of fear, it serves a purpose. But when something goes wrong in that system, it turns to anxiety, right? Part 2 then had anxiety in there. Well, obviously this is written by psychologists. But the point that I'm making is that fear is not what you should fear. Because fear serves a purpose. And when you don't allow it to be felt and then serve that purpose, it can turn into anxiety. And anxiety, interestingly enough, it's like, it becomes, see, fear, what's the difference? Fear, you're afraid of a specific thing, right? You're afraid of a specific thing with fear. Okay, I'm afraid that something bad will happen to my spouse. I'm afraid that something bad will happen to my child. I'm afraid that we won't have enough money. So it's a specific thing you're afraid of. If you don't deal with that, right? You don't deal with it. Either you suppress it or you do something else. You're not dealing with it. It's not serving its purpose. It can turn into anxiety, which is just generalized. A person who has anxiety is not just afraid of one specific thing. It's almost as if everything is unsafe. Do you understand? It's not just anymore a focused thing that I'm afraid of, but it's just I'm generally feel that I am always unsafe. The world is unsafe. One of the roots of anxiety comes when, one example that Dr. Gabor Mate discussed is that when you think about a child who is afraid, what does the child do when they're afraid? A child who can't talk, say. But how? How do they communicate it? They cry, right? That's the design of Allah. The child who's afraid cries. Now, why is the child designed to cry? To get security from the caretaker, yes? So the child, the system goes like this. Child feels fear. Child cries out for help, security, safety. And presumably, caretaker comes in response and makes the child feel safe, right? That's the system as it's supposed to work. But when the child is afraid and cries out and never gets that response, never gets that safety, maybe they are, there's a philosophy that you should let children cry so you don't spoil them. Or there's a philosophy of let them cry themselves to sleep, or there's whatever it is. So when the child learns that when they're afraid, there is no safety, then that fear turns to generalized anxiety because nowhere is safe. Do you understand? If I am afraid and then I get safety, then I realize, okay, the world is safe. There's safety. Safety exists. Safety exists. Because I got that safety when I was scared. But imagine that you didn't. Now, where is safety? There is no safety. Safety doesn't exist. And that is generalized anxiety. That's anxiety. Anxiety is just like nothing is safe. So I'm always in that high alert of fight or flight, survival. Nothing's safe. Nowhere's safe. Does that make sense? Asma, did you want to say something?
You reminded me of a book I read many years ago. It's called The Gift of Fear.
Okay, so she's...
Gavin Becker. So he basically says that fear is a tool to survive.
Yes.
Like if you're walking the street and you feel someone is following you, that fear is going to save your life.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a beautiful book.
Yeah, so she was saying it reminded her of a book called The Gift of Fear. And the premise of the book is that fear actually can save your life. That because fear is designed as a protective measure. For example, if you're going somewhere, imagine you're walking towards a cliff. Yeah. Presumably you're going to feel fear, and that fear is put in you to tell you, turn around, don't go close to the cliff. So fear is a protective measure, and that's absolutely right. The issue is, I heard this thing and it's so heartbreaking, but I'm going to share it with you. Basically, it's so triggering. But what happens is that when a child, for example, is uncomfortable with an adult, maybe it's a relative, someone who makes them uncomfortable, maybe they've done something, maybe they behave in a way that's uncomfortable. Now that child has in their design an alarm system that goes off, and this is designed by Allah, right? The alarm system says, I'm not comfortable with that adult. So maybe they won't want to hug that adult. They won't want to go to the adult's house. They won't want to be alone with that adult, right? But that adult is a relative, for example. So they tell the parent, I'm not comfortable with that adult. Maybe uncle or cousin or whatever, yeah? Family friend, whatever. I'm not comfortable. And the parent says, don't be silly. Don't be silly. That's your uncle. That's your cousin. That's our longtime friend. And the parent shuts down that natural instinct and tells the child, basically, that instinct is wrong. Turn it off. Turn it off because you're wrong. Because the parent is the one telling the child right and wrong, right? So the parent is teaching the child, turn it off, and then maybe they go and something bad happens to them. So now what have they learned? Well, number one, they've learned the world is not safe, that their own parent, who their job is to keep them safe, did not keep them safe. And number three, they've learned not to trust themselves because they've been told again and again, you're being silly, or that's not valid. Don't listen. Don't listen to yourself. And when a child grows up not listening to that natural design, it's an alarm system that Allah put in you. It's an alarm system that's designed in you. You have to listen to it. But if you grow up being told to shut it off and not to listen to it, then what happens is that you can be taken advantage of much more easily. You can be abused. So one thing also that they say is that abusers, they pick out certain people who won't, push back, people who won't speak up, people who won't, who will stay quiet. So this is also, as parents, we have to be very careful with that, right? But it's very common. It's very common. So going back to the relinquishing of, and I don't say relinquishing of control because we are not in control, but it's an illusion. So it's relinquishing the illusion of control and the idea that I have to be at the steering wheel and it has to go my way or else we'll crash. And that's not the case because we are blindfolded and Allah knows better. Allah knows. And so learning to trust Allah's plan, even when we have our own plan, make your plan, but understand that your plan is not the best plan. Allah's plan is the best plan. Understand? So I have a plan, great. Maybe that's even, my intention is this is part of my worship. This is me tying my camel. But don't ever think that your plan is the best plan. We are so blind. We know nothing of the unseen. Our knowledge is so limited. So it's understanding that. And then understanding it's Allah at the steering wheel, not me. And it's Allah who's going to protect my child, not me. And it's Allah who's going to protect my own self and not me. So we do our part. We do our work. We do our plans. We tie our camel. But we do not become attached to those things. We do not become so attached to the plan that we can't see another way or let it go when necessary. Reroute, take a new route. It's okay. That type of inflexibility is a sign of deep, deep unresolved anxiety and fear, maybe even trauma. So having the ability to be flexible and to understand that I can be totally wrong, right? Allah tells us in the Qur'an, عَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُ شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. It might be that you hate something and it's good for you. You hate this plan, but it's actually good for you. وَعَسَىٰ أَن تُحِبُّ شَيْئًا وَهُوَ شَرٌ لَكُمْ. And it could be that you love something. You're so attached to something. Whether that's the plan for your kids, the plan for your life, the way this day is supposed to go, the way next week's supposed to go, the way this next 5 years is supposed to go, whatever it is, a particular person, a particular outcome. You might love something, and it could be bad for you. وَعَسَىٰ أَن تُحِبُّ شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. And it's bad for you. You can love something, and it's still bad for you. وَاللَّهُ يَعْلَمُ وَأَنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. And Allah knows, and you do not know. So that's really where la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah comes, understanding that. One other thing I want to tie in is the aspect of the sacrifice of Ibrahim alayhi salam and what it is that we are commemorating in these days, right? So one of the best things you can do during these days is the udhiyah, or called qurbani. Udhiyah means sacrifice, and qurbani comes from yuqarrib, which means that it brings you closer to what? Allah. So through the udhiyah, through the sacrifice, you gain nearness to Allah. That's why one of the names is qurbani. Now, why do we do that? We do that to commemorate the sacrifice of Ibrahim alayhi salam and Ismail. Why? Because as we know, Ibrahim alayhi salam, he finally had a son, Ismail, after, not having children. And then look at what happened. And Allah tells us this in the Qur'an, that once he became mature. So this is kind of like, with like your kids, it's an investment, right? It's like, think about when you have a newborn and you're just literally just investing. Some might feel like there isn't much return. It's like give. And then, they smile and you're like, okay, it's starting, but it's a lot of investment in your children, especially when they're young. And, obviously the point isn't for them to give you something, right? But it's one of those ventures where it's a lot of investment and you don't necessarily see early return. Not necessarily. You might have put in a lot, but you don't necessarily see, it's like a farmer who's been working on this crop and, planting the seed and caring for the seed, and you might not see that outcome right away, right? Might not see it as you want ever. Who knows how you're tested? Many people are tested in different ways. Some people's children are taken away, right? Some people's children, maybe, God forbid, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests them in their children, right? So, but here you have Ismail at the point when okay, this is where there could be a return, because now he's at age of maturity. That's what Allah is telling us. He's now at an age of maturity, this child. And that's when Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam sees a dream that he is to sacrifice him. So we know that the dreams of the prophets, peace be upon them, are not like our dreams. Our dreams could be about what we ate for dinner, or they could be from shaitan, right? But the prophets' dreams, peace be upon them, are actual revelation. They are wahi. They are commands. So when he saw that dream, he understood that that's actually a command. So he goes and he tells Ismail alayhi salam, this is what I saw in my dream, that I was sacrificing you. Can you imagine that? Like being told by your parent. And he says, and then he says to him, what are your thoughts? It's literally like the conversation. And Ismail, and this is something that's not always focused on. This is something that's not always mentioned. What was the response of Ismail alayhi salam? We know that Ibrahim alayhi salam was obedient. But what about Ismail's role? What did he say? What was his response as the one who was going to be sacrificed? If'al ma tu'mar. Which literally means do as you are commanded. And that's something, right? It's one thing to be the parent, but it's another thing too, to be the one who's going to be sacrificed and to say, do as you are commanded. If'al ma tu'mar. Right? So the obedience is father and son. And then, as we know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he was, and Allah tells us that when he was actually going to do that, it's one thing for us to say we're going to do something. Yeah, I'll do that, right? We like to say we're going to do things. But he was like doing it. He was about to do it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called out to Ibrahim alayhi salam, and he said that you have fulfilled the commandment. And he did not have to sacrifice Ismail, and instead he sacrificed the kharuf, right? So this is why we sacrifice the lamb or the sheep, and this is the story and the commemoration of that act of sacrifice and obedience. And there's also another layer, and it has to do with attachments, and it has to do with, it could have been anything that he's tested in. It could have been anything that Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam was tested in. His money, anything. But it was the thing he loved most, right? And that's the sunnah of Allah, isn't it? We are tested in the things we love most. It's not a test otherwise, right? It's like, take my neighbor. Or my ex. I'm fine. I'll sacrifice that. It's not in the things that we might not be very attached to, but it's in the things that we are attached to that we are tested most. And this is why we're told that we are tested in the things that we love, in the things that, and you might ask why. I know I asked why. I always wondered this question. Do you know this? When I was writing Reclaim Your Heart, or before I wrote Reclaim Your Heart, in the process of Reclaim Your Heart, because it was a long process, over a decade, this was one of the questions. So I had two big questions of that period of my life. The first was, what am I doing wrong? Literally, what am I doing wrong? That was my question in life. It was like, the way I thought about it was, life is like a game and I'm getting the rules wrong. I knew I was doing something wrong because I was feeling a level of consistent pain and disappointment. And it was like it didn't feel like I was doing it right. And so I wondered, what am I missing? I literally wondered that. What part of the rules of this game am I getting wrong? And the second question was, I wonder why we are tested in the things we love most. That was my two questions, my big life questions. And because I was like, it always seems like it's only in the things we love most. What about in the things we don't love as much? Can't we just move the test there? You know what I'm saying? Why are we tested in the things we love most? And then what was I getting wrong? And the answer to both were connected. And the answer to both had to do with attachments, unhealthy attachments. Attachments to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Attachments to dunya. And that's what I wrote about in Reclaim Your Heart. But basically, in a nutshell, I guess, spoiler alert, what was I getting wrong? What I was getting wrong is that I was treating dunya as if it was Jannah. basically in a nutshell. I was treating this life as if it's Jannah. What did that mean? It meant that like, I wasn't very good with disappointment, really. I wasn't very good with things being less than perfect. I wasn't very good with accepting that things aren't going to work out always the way I envision them. You know, it was attachments to these outcomes, attachments to my plans, attachments to things in the dunya, to expectations. Very, very unrealistic expectations of perfection in everything of dunya. Most specifically with relationships and people. So that was what I was getting wrong for sure. Because dunya is not Jannah. And if you treat dunya as if it's Jannah, you're going to feel it. You're going to, the way I described it in Reclaim Your Heart, it's like digging into concrete with your bare hands. It's trying to make dunya into something that it will never be. It's like trying to get water by reaching into fire. You're only going to get burnt. You're not going to get water out of fire. And you're not going to get anything by digging into concrete with your hands. And so I had to accept dunya as it is, which is imperfect and temporary. These two things, imperfect and temporary. Now, what does that mean? Well, that's a whole other story, but it just means that you deal with dunya for what it is, not for what you wish it was. And it doesn't mean you don't try to improve things. As you guys know, I'm always talking about taking action to improve your situation. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. Allah does not change the condition of a people until they change what's inside themselves. So it's not about not trying to improve. It's about not trying to make dunya into something it will never be, which is permanent or perfect. Okay? But the other part of the question, and bringing it back to that, is why are we tested in the things we love most? What do you guys think? Exactly. So it has to do with not having competitive attachments to Allah. That's what it has to do with. It has to do with that when there's something in your life that can compete with Allah, that thing is going to be tested. Why? Because it's to cure you of that. Does that make sense? And it's not because Allah wants to take things away from us. It's because Allah wants to cure us. So the idea is, and why I talked about, why do people have to leave each other? Chapter 1 of Reclaim Your Heart, right? Talking about that issue. Talking about that concept. But then chapter 2 is, people leave, but do they return? What was the concept there? It's the fact that Allah is not wanting to take things away from us for the sake of taking things away. Rather, even when Allah takes, He's actually giving. So even in the taking, He's giving. But the question is, do we see that? And also that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can give us back things, and He can give us more, and He can give us better. Remember the lesson of Salama. What's the lesson of Salama in the seerah? Well, she lost her husband, Abu Salama, and he was one of the muhajirin, so one of the early Muslims. And after she lost him, the Prophet ﷺ taught her this dua. He says, say this dua, and whatever you've lost will be replaced with something better. What was that dua? Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Allahumma ajirni fi musibati wa akhlif li khayran minha. Meaning, very, very deep. Indeed, we belong to Allah, and indeed to Allah we return. Allahumma ajirni fi musibati. Oh Allah, reward me in my test. Wa akhlif li khayran minha, and give me what is better than what I lost. So she thought, how can I get better than Abu Salama, who was one of the early Muslims and the Muhajirin? Guess who she married next? The Prophet ﷺ. So that's a true story. So the idea here is that even when Allah takes something away, It is not to hurt us, and it is not to deprive us. It is to actually give us something better. But the question is, what is that thing that is better? And sometimes that thing that is better is becoming closer to Him. Sometimes that thing that is better is that He's cured us of an unhealthy attachment. He has cured us of an attachment that could have competed with the attachment to Allah. And that is what we learn from the sacrifice of Ibrahim alayhi salam. He was told to sacrifice the thing that he potentially loved most of the creation. And in that ability to sacrifice even that was an action, and it was a testimony to there's nothing that was bigger in his heart than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There was no attachment that competed with his love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the question is for us. And obviously our sacrifices cannot reach that level of the prophets. But at our level, there are sacrifices that we are asked to make that purify us. And there's going to be tests that we face that also are meant to purify us. And that's why we are tested in the things we love most.